The area of the autumn equinox horoscope in Egyptian zodiacs covers the constellation of Virgo as well as its neighbors, Leo and Libra. The fragment of the lesser zodiac with Virgo and Libra is destroyed. Nevertheless, the part with Leo and the auxiliary Virgo standing over the figure's tail has survived. Therefore, a part of the horoscope of autumn equinox managed to survive on the lesser zodiac. In the top row near the autumn equinox sign, the crossed-out stand with a heron on top, we see 6 figures, one of them male, with a circle over its head. All the other figures are female and represent Venus, whereas the male one is most likely to stand for Mercury, since it has a human face, and that's a distinctive characteristic of Mercury in Egyptian zodiacs. To the right of these figures, we see a lion and a bug on stands, with a star shining right over the former. This must be a reference to good visibility of some planet in Leo on the day of spring equinox. Therefore, all we see here is a minimal horoscope of Venus and Mercury. In the middle row we see an autumn equinox symbol over the figure of Leo with an auxiliary Virgo. It looks like a tablet with a snake bent in 2 close nearby. To the right, between Leo and Cancer, we see a militant male figure with a sword in one hand and a quiver of arrows in the other. It must be Mars. However, it can relate to this horoscope as well as the neighboring horoscope of summer solstice, since we find it at an equal distance from Virgo and Gemini. In the bottom row, right near the edge and underneath Leo with the auxiliary Virgo, we see a boat with a man standing inside it, supported by 2 similar female figures from either side. This must stand for Venus meeting some other planet, a male one, or, alternatively, the Sun. This scene shall therefore be useless in the verification of solutions, since purely astronomical considerations make it obvious that Venus passed by, around this time, and that it was close to the Sun. Furthermore, such meetings can figure as auxiliary scenes in Egyptian horoscopes, bearing no relation to secondary horoscopes. Therefore, in the painted zodiac the meeting scene is highlighted blue and green. The corollary is as follows. The only planets we find in the surviving part of the autumn equinox horoscope are Mercury and Venus. Mars between Cancer and Leo can also relate to this secondary horoscope, or alternatively, the secondary horoscope of summer solstice. Some bright planet was present in Leo on the day of autumn equinox. The part of the autumn equinox horoscope located in the vicinity of Virgo and Libra didn't survive. The area of this secondary horoscope covers Sagittarius and the neighboring constellations of Capricorn and Scorpio. The constellation of Scorpio in the lesser zodiac is destroyed. However, Sagittarius and Capricorn are in excellent condition. The secondary horoscope of winter solstice occupies a great deal of space in the top row. The remaining secondary horoscopes are a lot shorter, and the figures they contain, smaller. In the top row, around the symbol of winter solstice, cobra on a stand, we see 3 walking figures with planetary rods. We don't see the rod of the figure on the far right, since it ended up in the destroyed part. However, we see the figure's arm reaching forward in the exact same manner as the arms of other figures that carry staves, or rods. Walking figures with rods are accompanied by sitting figures with similar rods as well as fantasy animals, snakes with legs as well as vertically aligned snakes. The symbolism of the procession bears great resemblance to the primary horoscope in the greater zodiac of Esna, which we already managed to understand. However, in this case the horoscope is secondary and not primary. Thus, if we are to use the already deciphered greater zodiac of Esna, we can try to understand what is drawn here. Let us begin with the tiny animal hiding near the feet of the wayfarer in the far right. In the greater zodiac of Esna, 2 similar animals were used as a symbol of Mercury. We see no second animal here, this part of the zodiac got destroyed. However, its former presence in this precise spot becomes obvious from a comparison with the greater zodiac. The planet referred to here is therefore Mercury. Furthermore, all the sitting figures holding staves are female, which is emphasized graphically. The figure on the far left might be an exception, since its arm obscures its breast. We see several vertically aligned snakes on the left of the solstice sign. We already know them to symbolize Venus or Mercury. However, Mercury is in the far right, and there's a separate vertical snake close to its figure. Therefore, what we're seeing here must be Venus. It is most likely to be represented by all three sitting figures simultaneously, as well as the wayfarer with a rod and a leonine head on the far left, just like the male figure that accompanies Venus in the greater zodiac of Esna, as well as the long zodiac of Dendera. The second wayfarer with a staff that looks very much alike must stand for Jupiter, according to the greater zodiac. Indeed, in the greater zodiac, Jupiter was accompanied by a similar wayfarer with a leonine head, just like the one that accompanies Venus. Let us now consider the central row and the bottom row in this part of the lesser zodiac. In the central row we see a spring equinox symbol over a snake, or transposed, in between Capricorn and Sagittarius. This makes perfect sense. Spring equinox point is elsewhere, a lot further to the left, in Pisces. Therefore, its symbol is out of place, transposed, which is indicated accordingly. The meaning is easy to understand. The spring equinox symbol transposed towards Sagittarius is most likely to mean that the area of the spring equinox horoscope begins right here, to the left of Sagittarius. Otherwise, this zodiacal area would be occupied by the secondary horoscope of winter solstice. Thus, the secondary horoscope of spring equinox would cross the boundary of its neighbor's area, having chased it away from this place in the central row. To the right of Sagittarius, the destroyed part of the zodiac begins. Now let us study the bottom row. It contains no secondary horoscope symbols whatsoever. Let us sum up. In the secondary horoscope of winter solstice, Mercury must have been in Sagittarius or close nearby, as well as Venus and another planet, most likely Jupiter. Some planets may have been in Scorpio or Sagittarius, on the side of Scorpio. However, this part has been destroyed. On the day of vernal equinox, the sun in every Egyptian zodiac was shown in Pisces. Therefore, the secondary horoscope area includes Pisces and the neighboring constellations of Aries and Aquarius. However, the area occupied by this horoscope in the central row extends as far as the figure of Sagittarius. We shall begin with the top row. In the immediate vicinity of the spring equinox symbol, a crossed-out stand with a naked figure on top, we see the minimal secondary horoscope, or the figures of Mercury and Venus. We find nothing useful for decision verification, since Mercury and Venus are never too far away from the Sun. We see a great many figures in the area of this secondary horoscope in the central row. There is a two-faced man with a vertical snake in his hand in between Pisces and Aquarius. He possesses all the attributes of Mercury. Therefore, Mercury was in Pisces or Aquarius on the day of the spring equinox. In between Aquarius and Capricorn, we see a whole collection of planetary figures on snakes or in boats, 6 of them altogether. They're highlighted green in the colored zodiac, being most likely to represent an auxiliary astronomical scene. There are too many planets here for a single secondary horoscope. The most important consideration is that the secondary horoscope planets are drawn without transposition symbols in the central row, since the primary horoscope's planets are absent from it, and there is no danger of confusing them. However, all the figures on the scene have got transposition symbols, snakes or boats, except for one tiny figure at the very bottom. In the upper part of this auxiliary scene, we see 3 figures over a single snake. The figure in front has the head of a jackal. It is in motion, likewise the one that follows it, with a circle instead of its head. Finally, the third figure is sitting. The scene is most likely to represent half of Mercury's loop around the Sun. Mercury had been visible initially. This was followed by its disappearance behind the Sun, circle instead of head. Then it headed forwards and stopped, sat down, before turning back towards the Sun. Under this snake we see a large figure of a man riding a snake in a direction perpendicular to the zodiacal strip. On its right we see a tiny figure of a female in a boat, possibly Venus. Further to the right and downward we see a male figure with the head of a lion or a cat, facing the opposite direction, or the left of the zodiacal field. Therefore, we see 3 more planets taking part in the additional scene, one of them being Venus. We therefore see 4 planets in the additional scene, Venus and Mercury included in their number. Since the entire scene is located at the cusp of Aquarius and Capricorn, there were 4 planets in conjunction with the Sun in Aquarius or Capricorn, in January or February. This entire scene from the lesser zodiac is very close to the figure of Aquarius, as well as the Aquarian parentheses in the bottom row depicting decapitation scenes. Aquarius was likely to symbolize John the Baptist in Egyptian zodiacs. In particular, one of the key Christian feasts falls on January 6, and it is related to John the Baptist immediately, the Feast of the Epiphany. It would therefore be especially interesting to take this feast into account in our verification of solutions, and see whether it is indeed true that a total of 4 planets gathered near the Sun on this day. Let us however return to the secondary horoscope of vernal equinox. There is one figure left in the central row that we haven't mentioned as to yet, the man with a rod in his hand and a tall headdress. To his right we see the transposed vernal equinox symbol, which marks the border of the secondary horoscope under study. Thus, we see yet another planet in Capricorn, or, possibly, in between Capricorn and Sagittarius. There are no secondary horoscope symbols in the lower row in this part of the zodiac. As for the secondary horoscope of spring equinox, apart from the minimal horoscope of Mercury and Venus, we see another planet in Capricorn or at the cusp of Capricorn and Sagittarius. Apart from that, the position of Mercury has been clarified. It is either in Pisces or Aquarius. The Sun is shown in Gemini on the day of summer solstice. In the top row, on both sides of the summer solstice symbol, cobra on a stand, we see 2 sitting female figures. One of them is to the left of the solstice sign and holds a canonical planetary rod, whereas the other one is holding some sort of loop, crossed by 3 zigzags. This planet is doubtlessly Venus. The next thing we see on the right is an agglomeration of symbols that resemble the ones found near the summer solstice point on the greater zodiac, where we find something very similar to the left of the Gemini figure. If we are to mention planets, one can also point out the presence of a bicephalous snake here, apparently, a symbol of Mercury. Therefore, the only thing we see in the top row is a minimal horoscope. No other planets are represented here except for Venus and Mercury. In the central row we see the solstice symbol found here the most often, a man in a boat with his arm raised into the air. Nearby we find a 2-headed animal and a crocodile symbolizing Mercury and Venus in the minimal horoscope of the summer solstice point. However, to the left of Cancer we see the figure of a warrior with a sword and a bunch of arrows in his hands. This must be Mars, either in this horoscope, or that of the autumn equinox. In the bottom row, underneath Gemini, we find another symbol of summer solstice, a calf in a boat and a woman firing an arrow over the calf's head. The woman isn't holding a bow, but we see the arrow over the head of the calf nevertheless. In the Gemini parenthesis we see the same planet, already in a secondary horoscope, next to the first planet of the primary horoscope represented by two wayfarers with falcon heads. The boat is a transposition symbol. The final solution identifies the planet as Mars. Therefore, our verification of the complete solution must make it certain that Mars was in Gemini or somewhere right next to this constellation. This is in good concurrence with the symbol that resembles a warlike man holding a sword and looking ready to strike that we see between Leo and Cancer in the central row. If this symbol relates to the horoscope as well, Mars must be in between Gemini and Cancer, since it's in Gemini in the bottom row, and right next to Cancer in the central. We therefore come up with the following horoscope. Apart from the minimal horoscope comprised from Venus and Mercury, we also see Mars near Gemini, either in the constellation, or, if the warlike figure next to Cancer also pertains to this horoscope, on the cusp of Gemini and Cancer. The exhaustive solution of the lesser zodiac from Esna also proved to be unique. It falls on the interval between May 6 and 8, 1404 AD, postdating the date transcribed in the Greater Zodiac by a mere 10 years. Planetary positions on the celestial sphere were as follows: Sun in Taurus, Moon in Aries, a dying crescent, Mars in Gemini, Venus in Taurus, close to the Gemini cusp, Mercury in Taurus, close to the Aries cusp, Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter in Capricorn. The concurrence with the primary horoscope is absolute. The symbolic reference to Easter and the Passover full moon is given considerable prominence in the lesser zodiac. We discuss this in detail in part 13 of this series. The Lesser Zodiac describes the Feast of Passover as a resurrection celebration, which concurs with the Christian concept of Easter. The symbolic description of the Passover full moon and the Christian Easter feast is concentrated in the bottom row of the Lesser Zodiac, underneath the figures of Aries and Taurus from the central row, right where one would expect to find Easter, which is a vernal feast celebrated when the sun is in Aries or close nearby. In the colored version of the Lesser Zodiac, the scene that symbolizes Easter is highlighted green. It includes references to the birth of the Passover moon and the fact that it attains fullness on the 15th day, as well as the symbol of the dead Osiris, apparently, Christ, in coffin before resurrection, and, finally, the symbol of the week-long resurrection feast. According to the Christian Paschalian, the actual Easter day fell on the March 30th in that year. Therefore, May 8, 1404, which is the day of our solution, had been the 40th day after the Christian Easter. Therefore, the date transcribed in the Lesser Zodiac refers to the feast of the apodosis of Easter in 1404, according to the Orthodox Church. The best correspondence with the Lesser Zodiac was achieved on May 7, 1404, when the dying moon could be seen in Aries as a narrow crescent. Average deviation from best points only equaled 8 degrees, a quarter of a constellation's average length on the ecliptic. Even a deviation twice this size, circa 15 degrees, already implies good correspondence between calculated planetary positions and the indications of a zodiac. The concurrence here is nothing short of ideal. Thus, the dates transcribed in the monumental zodiacs from the Egyptian temples near the Bight of the Kings carved in stone by the allegedly ancient Egyptians are medieval, namely, April 22 to 26, 1168 AD in the long zodiac of Dendera. Morning of March 20, 1185 AD in the round zodiac of Dendera. March 31 to April 3, 1394 AD in the zodiac from the Greater Temple of Esna. May 6–8, 1404 AD in the zodiac from the Lesser Temple of Esna. The day coincides with the feast of the Apodosis of Easter, which must be the reason why we find so many Easter symbols in the Lesser Zodiac of Esna. Thus, the temples of Dendera were consecrated to events that took place at the end of the 12th century AD. The temples of Esna commemorate more recent events dating to the late 14th, early 15th century AD. The actual temples are therefore more recent than the dates found in the zodiacs.